welcome everybody to another episode of Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate. I'm your host, Brandon, here with another journey segment today. I'm really excited about Danisha joining us and sharing her experiences and story. Danisha comes from the foster care system, has gone on to author a couple of books, producing and making a documentary right now, and also obtaining a PhD. And so somebody to go through the adversity that she went through and the challenges that she went through to go on and show that you can get through anything and that you can have that self-confidence and that belief, and with the help of support and community, you can achieve a lot in your life. So I'm really excited to go into her story and share her experiences, because I'm sure a lot of people can take something out of it. So welcome, Dr. Danisha Keating. Appreciate having you today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And so just kind of going right into it. If you just want to kind of talk about how the beginning of it was like for you. Were you born in the foster care system, or was this something that came along a couple of years into your life? And then, we'll go from there.
So just backtrack. I grew up in just like a big family, but my mom was in the foster care system before, I think from like 8 to 18. So she's pretty long. Her and her siblings were in and out. But I didn't enter the foster care system until I was 15, almost 16. It was 3 days before my 16th birthday. But we had a lot of visitations from CPS where they would come into the house and say, hey, there was this report and we're going to have to investigate. And we were actually being homeschooled. And when I say homeschooled, I'm not talking like really homeschooled. We were watching TV. Like our homeschool was 11 o'clock, I Love Lucy, 2 p.m. Maury, all of those shows, like what shows we should not have been watching. And then PBS Kids in the morning. But it was one of those things that it's like I wasn't being educated properly, but I wasn't the only one. My parents did not believe in education for women. They believed that girls were only here for having babies and that was it. So there was this taintedness of motherhood, as well as like any other dream you had as a girl. It was like, that's stupid. You can't have that dream. You're not supposed to do that. And so enter in 13 years old, and the CPS workers start saying, hey, you need to either homeschool them, or you need to keep them, you need to watch your kids, or you need to put them in public school. And for the first time, I was actually entered in the middle of my freshman year. By middle, I mean March of the school year that ended in June. So I had no first fall semester of my freshman year, and I was thrown in the middle of a very chaotic year. And it was state testing was happening, your exit exams for high schoolers as a freshman. They're wanting you to pass all your classes. And I meet my high school counselor for the first time, and he just looks at me and he's like, I'm not wasting my time on you. And I'm just like, oh. And when he said that, it wasn't just like a pass by, look, you don't have the grades. He said he was going to actively make sure that I failed. And I'm like, what the heck? Why are you telling me this? I just met you. And he would say things like this consistently. And at our school, we were required to meet with them once a semester to make sure that we were on track, because we were a low income school. And that's just a reality. But every time I met with him for the last 3 years, he was changing my schedule. He wasn't telling me I needed classes. And then it was like, well, you can drop this, but then you won't graduate. And then it was chaos. But then when it was my sophomore year, that's when CPS actually came and picked us up and put us into foster care. And I had already been really forcing myself to get to school, fighting. Most kids fight to not go to school. I was fighting to go to school, and having to, arm wrestle to get out the door, and walk myself to school, walk myself back home from school, because there was no support in this. And then you add on the emotional abuse, the physical abuse, spiritual abuse, and sexual abuse. And that was just one of those things that you kind of sit back and you're like, what's the point of fighting if this is just my life? But then you're like, there has to be something else. This can't be all that I'm here for, is to just be treated this way and then to grow up and have kids. That just did not make sense to me. And a lot of the people around our family had been people who, I saw mom's work, I saw dad's work, I saw them get educated, but then there was more people that we were isolated from, where it was that was encouraged. So if someone encouraged education, we were pulled away. So it was just a weird dynamic. And I've been talking to my counselor about this, and she basically said, like, it's very cult-like behavior. And I'm like, that's the only way I can say it. Like, very cult-like, very out there. But when I was turning, it was 3 days before my 16th birthday, I was actually entered into a foster home, and I was there for a few weeks before they put me with my older sister. And then when I turned 18, my caseworker visited me at school and said, okay, you're 18, you can't stay with your sister anymore. You got to go, because there are kids who are in the home, in the bedroom, like, that are under the age of 18. So you can't be here. And I'm like, oh my gosh. That was in 2007. In 2023 is when I found out my older sister had no idea that conversation existed. She thought I just up and left. So she's like, I just thought you were being an a-hole, dude. And I was like, no. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I told you this conversation, but because she had so much on her plate, it was one of those conversations that was just forgotten. But it was this chaos of high school and then being like, I want to get out. And then getting out of high school and being like, oh, I'm done. And it was like, well, what's next? So I started working for about 6 months and realized there wasn't going to be a lot of opportunities for me to be able to get the jobs I wanted without a degree. And I didn't really want to work at the warehouse I was working at. I was a forklift driver, and I was like, I don't want to do this. It just didn't seem fun to me. It's like this, I could do it, but it was very like, every day is the same. And that was very boring. I had no passion for that. And some people really do, but I was just like, I'm good. Like, I don't want to do that. So I started going to community college, and I failed my first semester. Went from working full-time to part-time during the recession of 2008 and 9. And started going to school full-time, but immediately ended up being homeless from 18 to 24. And I had over 33 different addresses. So it was one of those things that, like, I just kept moving. And people will ask all the time, they're like, why? Why did you move so much? And I'm like, because when you start to rent a place and they want more money, if you're month to month, they don't care. For apartments, you can get a long-term 1-year contract, but rooms that should be cheaper are often not. And in the middle of a recession, people are losing their jobs, they're losing hours. So they're like, what can we do to bring more money into our home? And it's like, oh, we have this room. Let's rent it out. $500 a month. Perfect. Okay, now we want $700 instead because the electricity bill is a lot higher because we're all home now. And it's like, but I'm not here. I'm at school. I'm at work. I'm not actually here any more than bedtime. And that led to 33 different addresses. And it led to inconsistent income, trying to get my bachelor's done. So after that, I was 24, and I get a call from my brother, and he's just turned 18, and he's like, hey, I need somewhere to stay for the night. So I'm like, okay, cool. Renting a room, had been there for about 6 months. And he comes over and he's like, no, I need to move in. And I'm like, okay, we have to find an apartment because this is an all-girl home. Like, you can't be here. So we went off and found an apartment. And a month later, another brother called, and he was 19. And he's like, I need a place to stay. I'm running away. I'm like, you're 19. You're technically not running away. You're an adult. And he's like, okay, I need a place to stay. I was like, fine, I'll come get you. So I went and picked him up. And within 2 months, I got another call to come pick up my other 3 siblings who were 14, 15, and 12. So I suddenly, in a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 500 square foot apartment, there are 6 of us living there. And I took guardianship of the 3 who were under the age of 18, so that way they didn't get put into the foster care system again. And in the middle of that, finishing my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD as I'm raising my siblings. So it has been a journey of chaos and like just a lot of people hear me and they're like, no, this did not happen. I'm like, I actually have proof. I have paperwork. And they're like, oh shoot, this really happened. And I'm like, I didn't go out looking to make my story worse. It just kind of ended that way. And you're just like, what do I do? But yeah, that's it.
I mean, like you just said, there's a lot of chaos there, and going through a lot that's in vital years of your life too, right? I mean, you're that sophomore year and having to go into foster care. So I just want to ask you that first experience of actually being removed. You know, if you've dealt with those CPS workers and you kind of know when you have some of those conversations, and I've learned working in schools that kids also know what to say and what not to say in certain
Yeah.
situations, in certain ways to say it. So like when you first realized you were about to be taken out of your home, you know, what were you feeling
Yeah.
as you were going through that?
So the way that I was taken was really strange. I had been in color guard my sophomore year, and we were doing it. It was a football game that Friday night, and we had a color guard competition the next day. And I had told my mom, like, and she's like, "I'm not taking you. You got to figure it out," like I had always done. So I was like, "Fine, whatever." So I stayed at a friend's house. We went to a color guard competition all of Saturday, and then we came back, and it was Saturday night. And I pull up, and like I'm trying to call my mom the whole time, and she's not answering. And I'm like, okay, normally by the 15th time she'll answer if it's from somebody else's phone. So I called her again, and it just started going straight to voicemail. And I'm like, okay, that's really weird. Something's going on. And I called my brother-in-law. So I get to the band room where Color Garden Band goes. And I'm like, fine, I'm going to call my brother-in-law because I didn't have his number on me, but I had it in my bag at the school. So then I get it and I call him, and he's just like, where the heck have you been? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I already told mom. And he's like, dude, your mom has been arrested. Your siblings have been taken. They're in foster care, and you need to tell me where you're at. I'm like, I'm at the school, but wait, what's going on? And he's like, again, your mom was arrested. The kids are in foster care. They've been looking for you. And I'm like, wait, why didn't anyone call my cell phone? Like, I had that little flip phone at that point. Like, I was just like, it worked. It had minutes on it. Um, but immediately I went into panic and was like, I don't even know what to do. And what I decided to do was to hide in one of the class like closets because that's I didn't know what else to do. And so I remember running into that room, and several people were in there, and they're like, Danisha, what's wrong? And I'm like, my mom was arrested and my siblings were put into foster care. Like, they're telling me to hide here until my brother-in-law can come get me. And my brother-in-law lived probably about 10 minutes from the school at that point. So I was like, okay, I just got to wait this out. But it felt like an eternity of him getting there. And then there was a knock on the door, and it was the band teacher, and he's like, hey, someone's here for you. And I thought it was my brother-in-law. So I go like running out with my stuff to the car. And like I just like go out the band room and like make a hard left, and I start walking, and I hear someone go, Danisha. And I'm like, look back, and it's these two men with my band director. And I was like, what the freaking A is happening? And he's like, hi, they introduce themselves as if I can even hear a word that they're saying. And I'm like, no, you're not taking me. And the caseworker said back, he's like, you don't have a choice. And he laughed at me. He's like, you don't have a choice. And I'm like, I do have a choice. I'm not going with you. This is kidnapping. I don't want to go. And he's like, that's not how this works. You're already enrolled in another school. You're going with us. You don't have a choice. And I like lost it. And I just started cussing him out and was just like, we're going to be back on at school on Monday. Like, you have no idea. We've been doing this on our own forever. Like, we don't need you. Get away from me. And then my brother-in-law like grabbed me from like my shoulders from behind, and he's like, you need to calm down. And then he's talking to the caseworker, and one of the band moms brings me to like the side, and she's just like, we don't cuss at people. And I'm like, my life is falling apart. She goes, but we don't cuss at people. And I'm just like, look here. like I'm so upset. And so she started praying with me because she knew that I was just like, there was just so many. And then I just broke down crying because I'm like, what is happening? And there was no choice in it. Even though I was 15, almost 16, I didn't have a choice on where I was going to go. And the caseworker, he was very rude. They're not all rude like that, but he was just above the top. Um, and like, I've met people who actually knew him, and they were like, he was just not great. But he was just saying, like, we've moved you schools, we've already enrolled you, this is a done deal, stop crying. And then he told me, he said, I have worse cases than yours, you need to stop crying about it. And he told me like cases of like how bad children had been hurt, and even one of them was a baby who was hospitalized. And he's like, so cry me a river, and like just like get in the van. And I'm like, I'm going with a complete stranger. And then I got confused because they took me home. And I was like, okay. And he gave me a grocery bag. And he said, you have 5 minutes to go pack your stuff. And like the grocery bag's like that big. And I just like filled it with whatever I thought would work. And then they drove me to my foster home. And I remember them telling me, like, some of your brothers are at this place and your other brothers are over here at this other place, and you're going to be here with your brothers, but we're probably not keeping you with them. We're probably going to move because you're too old. This house that you're with doesn't want teenagers. They already have two. And I'm like, you're not going to just move me from my siblings. And again, like, there's no option. It was like, this is what's happening to you. So it was just that the first night and first situation was just not met with love or grace from a caseworker to be like, hey, your life is falling apart. It was just like being mocked, being laughed at, being told like, oh yeah, watch what I get to do to you. And like, those are not good things to hear, especially when your world is already falling apart. And for me, like, people don't realize this. Like, for me, I was used to taking care of my siblings, going to school, doing what I had to do, and having absent parents. That was just my life. So then you take me out of that and you're like, this is for your good. And you put me with complete strangers who are then rude. It's just like, how is this any better than what I've been dealing with? At least I had control over what I did and said, and how long I could take a shower, how long I could be on the phone, when I could do my homework, if I could go to school on time. Those things are things that I can do myself. I don't need someone trying to be my mom. And it just felt like I looked back at something I wrote when I was a senior, and I just broke for this little girl, because it's just like, you're 15, 16 years old, but you're still a child. And you are being told like your life is never going to be the same. You don't get to be with your friends anymore. You don't get to be with your family. Not a like, hey, we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to help you. It's like none of that. It was just like this weight of, I don't know what's going to happen next. And it was complete just chaos. So that's like the first time that happened before, like, I was moved with my sister, but then it was still, there was just life happening because caseworkers are still involved, and it doesn't really matter if you're with family or not. It's just like, you just, after that, you don't feel like your life is stable. But the whole time that I was in the system for the basically 2.5 years, my caseworker would come to school every week to sit there and tell me like why he was going to move me. So it was like this active threat every single day that I walked and breathed. Like, he's like, you mess up on a quiz, if you're absent from class, if you're late to class, I'm going to move you homes. Don't F this up. And I'm just like, so you just live in this like high anxiety, high stress, don't screw this up. And then like when you mess up, you're just angry, because then you have the normal emotions of all the grief that you're going through, but then you have this extra pressure of like, don't mess up, because it's gonna impact you. But this, I think even worse than that wasn't him just saying like, hey, I'm going to move you. He started then realizing that that wasn't a bigger threat to me as being moved from my siblings or my siblings getting moved. So he started telling me like, do you know how many people like to adopt little white boys with blue eyes? And I was like, that's my little brother. And he's like, I don't care. He's like, you know what? I could like that. Your little sister, like that, I could adopt her out so fast. Behave. And I wasn't doing anything wrong. So it's like you have the already chaotic stuff, then you have bullies in your life, and people are like, act normal. Go. And you're like, this is not normal.
That's so much pressure on a
Absolutely.
young girl your age. And like you just said, yeah, maybe it wasn't the best situation you were in, but you had figured out how to do your best in that situation. And so then getting ripped out of that and having, to switch everything up in your life, look out for your siblings as well, and then have somebody constantly kind of threaten you all the time. Did you have an outlet at the time, healthy or unhealthy? Did you have an outlet to get some of that out? Because just thinking about that at that age for me, I'm not having to think about near anything, that pressure that you have. But and I still struggled, and I ended up dealing with it with unhealthy coping skills. So what was your outlet in those situations? How did you get some of those emotions?
So color guard and choir were my best friends. If you look at my transcripts, the only A's that I got were from like extracurricular activities. But if I was not in choir and I was not in color guard, I wouldn't have been known by people at all. Like I would have just been in and out of school and that's it. But these two outlets, I was able to be like I was able to go and dance and sing and act to where I wasn't having to live my life. Like I would rather be on the stage than having to go home. And that really, when I looked back at my schedule, I was there at school from 6 o'clock in the morning to 9 p.m. at night, Monday through Friday. And then on Saturday, I was at games and competitions because it was easier to be gone than it was to be at home. And I found more love and acceptance and family at school than I did when, and this is just the sad reality. And I hope people hear like the differences where it's not just going home and taking care of my siblings. I would be loved and accepted by my friends at school where it's like they would bring me lettuce for lunches. They would bring me sandwiches and chips and things like that. They'd buy me food if they saw that I wasn't eating because they cared so much. But when I would go home, I had to break the door down just to get in the house because I was locked out again. I had to climb through a window to get into the house because my parent was sitting there cussing me out saying I don't deserve to be in the home and I could sleep in the front yard. So it was like I left love to go back home to being abused.
And I think with what you're saying and working in schools at times, I don't think people realize that schools can be such that positive outlet for people, and those after school
Yeah.
activities, no matter what they are, can be such a powerful thing, and that's where you get to
Mm-hmm.
at least have a little bit of normalcy, right? A little bit
Because
of
nobody knows. Yeah.
yeah,
Nobody really knows what's going on behind closed doors, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to act out because we're safe in a place where, like, I know my teacher's not going to call my CPS worker versus my mom was doing that to me. Like, how crappy is that? I'm gonna call your caseworker if you don't behave. Like, what? But then it's situations where when you're at school, you really do escape the life you have at home. And it's not Disneyland, but it feels like Disneyland. It feels away from what you have to deal with. And I would always like get to school and feel like I'm like, okay, I can put my shoulders up. No one's gonna know. No one can tell by the writing on my face. But as soon as I would leave, just leaving the parking lot, I would feel that weight and being like, okay, when I get home, I'm going to have to fight this parent on getting food. I'm going to have to fight that parent on how to behave. I'm going to have to child that parent so that way they know that they can't do that to the other kid. And like, I'm going to have to do their homework. I'm going to have to do my homework and stay up late and then do XYZ. And that was what was waiting for me at home.
and I appreciate you sharing that a lot because I mean that's super vulnerable, but it also shows that you just never know, what people are going through,
Yes.
and to show a little bit of
Yeah.
grace because, like you said, you felt like you could get to school, put your shoulders up a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of show off a different side, and then right when you got in that car and you had that realization, like, oh, I'm going back to this situation that is just
Yeah.
terrible, and for you to show up every day, right? For you to show up and keep trying and keep trying and keep trying, like that just shows that we never know what somebody's dealing with, and that grace can be so important at times.
Absolutely.
So, kind of going, looking at your next step after high school, right? Going into community college and making that transition, and then also failing and struggling in that transition initially. Did you know right away what you wanted to do going out of high school? Did you have some confidence in yourself that like, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm going to try to do? Or because of the situation you came from and that counselor you had in high school, did you even doubt that you could take that path?
So I had a really weird set like positive confidence that college was for me. And when I look back at my high school grades, I'm like, why? Like I have no idea why I thought I could do college. But I literally had D's and F's and a few C's. I had like one or two B's, but I'm like very surprised that I even got those B's. So I was like, I bet you that was the teacher who let us do our homework in class. Like I'm pretty sure that that was that teacher. But when you look at my overall GPA was a 2.5 from high school. The only A's that I got were in color guard and choir and PE. That's it. Everything else was F's and D's. Like I failed a class my senior year, and then they put me in the next semester and said, well, you just need one quarter or one semester of this science class to be able to graduate. And I had to do it on a computer because I had to do an entire year in a semester. I should not have wanted to go to college. I should have been like, college is not for me. But I think because I took time off in that 6 months and realized that if I didn't go to college, there really wasn't anything else out there for me except for minimum wage jobs. It wasn't gonna, there was no tide gonna turn and be like, oh, you're so smart. Here's this job. Like, you can make $100,000 without a degree. Like, that wasn't for me. That wasn't gonna happen. Like, I knew the reality of that. It's very rare. But I had someone tell me, and at the time she had been looking for her visa. She was a legal immigrant, and she said, "You have opportunities that I don't have, and even if you're not smart enough, you can figure it out. Like if you don't think you're book smart, you could still figure it out." And I took 6 months off from school, from high school to college, and I started in college and immediately failed my first semester. I was working from 6 o'clock in the morning to 2:30 p.m. And then I was in school from 6 to 9, 3 times a week. I just was not doing well. I got a C in one class and the rest of them I failed. Like I was just like, I got an A in dance. Like I'm really good at extracurricular activities, but not like math and science and all that other stuff. But over the course of 8 years, it took me 8 years to get my bachelor's done. I mentally changed my game plan over 300 times easily. Like, I want to do psychology. I want to do this. I shouldn't have chosen psychology. And that's the route I chose for my bachelor's. And I, again, look back at my grades in college and I'm like, why did you choose psychology when you dropped every single class? You got a D in one of them. The only class you did a B in was sociology, which is not psychology. Those are two different things. But I looked at this sociology class and was like, I'll be fine in psychology. Let me go do this as my major. I literally look back and I'm like, this poor girl, like she had this like this belief in her that was like, I got this. I can do this. And I was just like, I don't know where that came from. So if people are like, what's your blueprint? I have no idea. Fake like confidence, I guess. But I think I was so used to everybody telling me like, you can't do this. And they were serious. They were not doing it to light a fire underneath me. They literally were just like, you're not mentally capable. I have dyslexia. So that they've always kind of used that as well, because you have dyslexia, you can't make it. What they didn't realize is that you can find ways to learn with dyslexia. And that was something that I started to realize and find in college. And that kind of helped me like, oh, I could get this. I could do this. But mentally, I changed my plan over 300 times. Like I remember that I was like, okay, I want to be a history teacher. And then I was like, oh, well, I'll be a physician assistant. I'll do I'll do medical assisting. I'll do teaching. I'll do acting. I'll do like, what was the other one? English. I'll be an English professor. I said that for a really long time. And then it was like, oh, I really like psychology because I finally can understand what's happening in my mind and my heart and why maybe some of the stuff my family went through happened. But it was not something that I was good at. My grades throughout my entire bachelor's program, I like retook classes. D's and C's. And ironically, I am a psychology professor now, and my PhD is in psychology. So it's just kind of funny when I look back at like people really, when they look at your as an admissions counselor. I did that for 8 years. I was an admissions counselor. So I like went through this new lens and I was like, that's why I was rejected from every single school ever. No wonder I couldn't go to a university at all. I had to go the community college route, which was really good for me. But like, no wonder why I couldn't even get a scholarship somewhere. I was trying to transfer with less than a 2.5 GPA. That's not great. And then it's like I had a list of like, I don't know how many classes. There was a lot of classes I had at community college. Only like 10 or 15 of them transferred. And that's not great. Yeah, because none of the grades weren't there. But I think my hope is that somebody here is like, I know this thing is so stupid. When there's a will, there's a way. The will can only get you so far. At some point you have to start being strategic. So that way you're not just willing it. Like you actually have to try. And I think during my community college classes, there were a few things that professors would say is like, look, you have a choice in this. Like, your choice is if you want to pass this class, you go to get tutoring. That's what you do. You want to be successful and get your degree done, you have to try. Like, above and beyond of what you've ever tried before. Not that you're not trying now, but like you have to be strategic in your movement and get the tutoring, get the help, take the time to study, stop putting jobs above learning. Like you might have to do this multiple times. It's okay to retake a class. Failing a class is not the end of the world. And I don't think a lot of us understand that if you fail a class, you can retake it. Didn't know that for a while. So there is one class I refuse to take again because it's music theory, and I refused. Like, they're like, you could. And I was like, no. Like, I will take the hard F. Like, I'm good. I was like, I'm not doing it. But other classes, I'm like, try again, go again. But I think that there are things that we gravitate toward because it's more of an answer to our past. And then there's things that we're actually passionate about, that psychology turned into something I was passionate about because it was one of those things that I was like, oh, we all have a reason for why we act the way that we do. And then it impacts us holistically as a person. But I think that they're like, I like English, I like writing, but I don't like teaching it. I love psychology. I don't like being a counselor because I'm a little too street cred to be like, get over yourself, try again, stop being baby. That's not great for a counselor to kind of like, come on, let's go. Some people are like, I would love that. And I'm like, I know what up here happens. It's not good. It's not like in love. It's just kind of like, you big baby, get over it. So I recognize these things along the way, but it was because of people. People helped me recognize things and be like, not that it was like, hey, it's a dumb idea to go this route, but they're like, but would you be happy with that? Is that what you want to do? Do you like psychology because of the things you get to learn about yourself, or do you like psychology because of a bigger picture? But I should not have originally been like, yes, college, yes, psychology. Like, you look at my grades and you're like, what, why? Like, you're clearly not good at this subject. Like, why would you go that way? I don't know. I had too much like confidence, but I'm glad that I did, because that confidence led to me to today. But it was just like, I don't know where that came from at all.
Yeah, that's such an awesome thing, though, that being able to have that confidence and keep chasing that even after failing, right? And that's why I really like
Yeah.
that piece of advice you said, that, the whole, if there's a will, there's a way. Well,
Yeah.
you need that way as a part of that will. Because I know, like, just looking at times in
Yes.
my life, it was like, oh, I wish my life was better. I wish I was doing better in life. And I wish that really, really hard. But my
Right.
actions were still going against what I was hoping for and what I was willing for. And it
Yes.
wasn't until I started like putting together some of those pieces, like you just said,
Yeah.
that like now the way I was trying to behave and the way I was trying to act and believe, that matched with the will. So then I was able to start actually moving forward. And something else I wanted to ask you about is you've mentioned it a couple times at different points in your life, is like your friends being there, and these professors being there and other people being there.
Yes.
Looking at your life growing up and having to figure out a lot on your own, as you were going into
Mm.
communities that were more supportive, that were more like, hey, let's figure out this for you and the best ways that it works for you, were you receptive to that help first, or was it so new to you that you just
Favorite.
soaked it in, or did you push back because you were used to your own kind of way?
So yes and no and both. So let me explain that. There are certain people that I was like, I like you, you're my friend. And then there were the people who I was like, bye, like, don't try to talk to me. But then there were people who came in when it was a parent figure, where if they came in too hard, or they came in without knowing me, and the first words that come out of somebody's mouth is, I've heard of you, and then they try to give you advice, that doesn't float well with me ever. Like, I'm 34 years old now, and I still react like I'm 8, where I'm like, like, I've heard of you, and I start being really rude, because it's just like, you cannot give advice and feedback and really help build structure with somebody unless you have a relationship with them. So the people I had relationships with, those are the people that I asked questions and I listened. One of my favorite teachers in high school, shout out to Mr. Sullivan. He was a U.S. history teacher in my senior year. And, they do the job fairs at school where it's like, hey, there, you can be in the military, you can be this, you can go to the colleges. And it's kind of like this fair that you get to kind of attend. And we had, I was almost signed up for the military. Like all I had to do was sign and go to my basic training. Like I was like, this is the plan. This is where I'm going. And I knew Sullivan had been in the military. And so I was just like, hey, I want to ask a question. Like, what are some of the jobs? I know you said you did photography. And he goes, oh, baby girl. And I was like, what? And he's like, oh, no, no, sit down. And I'm like, okay. And like awkwardly, I sit down. I'm like, yeah. And he goes, most kids, I would say, yes, go get your shit together. You're going to cry. And they don't do crying in the military. And I was like, Sullivan. And he's like, no, like, he's like, you're sensitive. He goes, you're broken because of your past, not because you need to get your crap together. And I was like, okay. And he's like, you're not doing the military. He's like, I know you don't have parents, but I will be that parent to tell you no. And he goes, look into college, start with a community college. And I was like, okay. And I started looking at it and I'm like, okay. And he goes, just take 6 months off. Don't sign that line. Figure it out. And he's like, you're going to be so mad at yourself. He's like, you're going to hate it. Don't like it. It's not going to get you where you want to go. And he even said, he's like, you're smart. You just need someone to show you how to be book smart. And that's it. And I was just like, well, that's kind of offensive. And he's like, no, not like that. Like he wasn't trying to be mean, but we already had this relationship where he could say it that bluntly. And I'm like, okay, let me think about this. And he was right. I came back and he's like, so did you sign it? And I was like, no, I ended up not doing it because you're right. I think there's another way for me. And I don't think that that's my route. And he goes, good. And then there was another kid where he's like, did you sign up for the military? And he's like, no. And he's like, you need it. Go. And it was literally like, how come you're telling her not to go? And then he's like, you need to go. She does not need to go. It was just because he knew what we needed. He paid attention. But I had other people say like military would be so good for you. But again, I didn't have this relationship with them to be like, can I ask questions? Can they be hard questions? Can you give me your honest opinion? Because everyone looked at the dollar amount. They're like, oh, you don't have family, you don't have support, you've had a messed up childhood. Okay, military so that you can get the rest of this stuff for free. But he saw me and he goes, that's not for you. He's told me one time, he's like, I could see you being a lieutenant. I could see you being somebody who's ranked really high, but he's like, you would not survive basic training because you are a sensitive person. And he goes, it's not bad. He's like, and he goes, I don't want them to break you. And I was like, okay. He goes, they break you. And he goes, you need to be in this world the way you are. And that made me kind of sit back and go, oh, he does see me. So that's where there's going to be people who come in your life who have a relationship, who can speak into your life. And I would hope that they would speak truth instead of like encouragement to do bad things, but like truth of like, hey, this is where you're going and this is not good. But then there are some people who want to have that relationship with you, but they don't have the trust built yet, but they want to speak into your life so fast, but they don't wait. And so what happens is that the receiving end is like, you're trying to correct me. I always felt like they were trying to be my parent. And they would say something like, well, you don't have a mom, so I'm trying to be that for you. And I'm like, I raised myself. I'm good. See you later. Bye. And I would just be so unreceptive to it. But it was usually the parents who I had those friendships, the teachers I had those friendships with that I could say, hey, this is what's going on. I knew that they had my back. So they're not going to lie and misguide me on anything.
I really love how you talked about that perspective with people in that community and those relationships, because I like what you said with him being able to see you and not just those external things. And you kind of use that as an example of like somebody seeing, oh, you don't have a mother, so let me be that mother. And they're not necessarily looking at what you need. They're just looking at what they see and what they think you need. And so I really,
because they're trying to fill what they can fill, not what I actually needed. They're like, oh, you have this missing. I have that ability. Let me fill your need. And it's like, that was not actually my need.
And that's such an important part on either side of that relationship when
Yeah.
you're talking and you're trying to be supportive or have somebody support you, is are they looking at those external things? And just as you're saying that, I'm thinking about how many people just told me to stop doing drugs because it was bad for me, and like, oh,
So, so
there was
easy.
right. There was so much more internally that I remember in rehab. I really connected to the people I worked
Mm,
with there because it was like they like really went into me about what I needed to be honest with and what I needed to face, and it was stuff I didn't
yes.
want to face, and that's where I had the
Yeah.
most growth. So I really like the way your perspective and the way you worded that and explained that.
Yeah. And it's something too that you asked the question too, like, did you go towards anything that wasn't good? And it's like, absolutely. I went toward very toxic relationships. I went through several eating disorders because I wanted to have some sort of control. And a lot of the times I felt ashamed about what I looked like. But there was a lot of control there. Like when I really addressed it and was like, this was the one thing I can control was what I ate and what I weighed. And if I didn't like it, I would work harder. And that's something that I didn't realize for a decade where I was like, why do I run toward like the scale? It was so bad. My eating disorder was so bad that I could feel when I gained a pound. Literally, I would have pains in my chest when I gained a pound. And then I would check and I'd be like, yep, gained a pound. Like I knew that's how bad I was clocked in to my mindset. But the addiction doesn't always look like drugs or alcohol or being crazy. Sometimes it literally is just internal control of thoughts, like being like perfectionist. That's a big one. Like, I'm so sorry for whoever I offended, but being a perfectionist, you're trying to control everything. And that was me. Like I was trying to control every aspect of my life. So then it was like, well, I'm not having fun anymore. I'm just being controlling. And that was really hard because then I gravitated toward really toxic people because that was what I was used to. And I ended up in more abusive relationships because I wasn't thinking like I deserved better. And then it was like, well, how can I think I deserve better if I don't even treat myself that way? I'm just going to take anything that comes at me. And that's not good. And that took a long time to work through to be like, oh, and it comes down to you have to be honest with yourself. What are you battling internally, and what are you afraid of being exposed? Because when that exposure is there, it's not the drugs or the alcohol or the weight. It was my internal thought. Like if anyone knew the thoughts that go through my head, they would shun me and be like, "You need to leave." And that was more embarrassing than someone calling me out for being too skinny or being overweight. And that's harder for me to be someone be like, wow, your thought process is really not great.
Yeah, I love that you said it doesn't matter what the addiction is, because even after getting clean, until I continue to change my thought process and my behaviors and how I approach things, that's when, I really started working on myself and seeing positive things in
Mm,
my life. And like you just said, it doesn't matter what that vice is. It can be, drugs or alcohol, it could be an eating disorder, it could just be your thoughts or some of those behaviors where, you said you
working
gravitate
a
to those things
lot.
that aren't good for you. Yeah, working,
Yeah,
yep.
overworking, overspending on money. I know other people's addictions have been like looking like they have a glamorous life, and then they don't because they're so far in debt. And it's like gambling. There's just so many different ones.
And so I like that you put that light on it, because it's important to realize, like, it's not always about those external things that we use, but it's like you said, it's those internal thoughts. And I know I was right there with you, like with that shame and that guilt of what my thought process was and what I thought about and everything. And it just, I didn't want to share that. I was embarrassed. And that's where I was like, okay, well, if I just get high again, I don't got to even think about it myself. So I don't have to share it and I don't have to face it. And
Well,
we use those
and
things
I'm
to do that.
sure Yeah, and I'm sure that there were times that you shared how you felt with someone and either were mocked or told to be quiet or be like, "Oh, get over yourself." And I know that is why so many people with depression and anxiety have a hard time actually saying, "Hey, I have depression and anxiety," and that leads to addictions and or really like odd behaviors because they're just like, "Well, I'm trying to hide it so well that people don't know. And like you said, like getting high was just like, it's so much easier not to have to worry about it. I knew a lot of my friends who were like, that's why I get high. That's why I get drunk. And I'm like, dude, like that's so bad for you. But I'm like, you can't just wish these thoughts away. You can't just say, well, I hope that it'll go away. And tomorrow, like you have to do the work. And unfortunately, that is a part of like digging down deep. You don't have to be like, here's my whole abuse story. But maybe nothing happened, but maybe there's something internal that you've picked up where you're like, well, I feel like it's my responsibility. Like I know someone told me once that in high school, he said, I didn't have it as bad as you, but my dad left when he was young, and he said he felt like he had to be the man of the house. So he's like, I never feel like I can be a kid or a teenager. Like I always act like the adult in the room because that's my responsibility. And I'm like, bro, that's not, you're like 15 like me. Like, it's not our responsibility. But it led him into a bunch of different addictions. And he said, like, it's easier to mask it and not feel it. And his addictions weren't drugs and alcohol, but it was just, there was a lot. Like he did like smoke weed and stuff like that, but like he wasn't like shooting up heroin, but he was like trying to control his life in different ways, and he came crashing down. And one of the biggest ways he had was that he was trying to get perfect straight A's. And I remember like we had to sit, and like he broke down crying and losing it because he was just like, I can't do this anymore. And we had no idea. But he's like, my dad left when I was like 5. And he's like, I felt like I had to be the man of the house. And my heart like breaks because it's just like, where did we get this perception? Like our job was to be the parent. And that's so that a lot of kids are in that. A lot of young adults, I think, are in that. And then we're just expected to like, hey, go be normal. Like have fun. You're like, how, I don't even get a childhood. And that's something that I think I've had to grieve more and more is the what should have been and the what could have been. Not even like, look, you tell me like I didn't get a childhood. I'm like, yeah, whatever. But like, what about the should haves? Like, I should have had parents. What of the could haves? I could have had better parents. I could have had better grades. I beat myself up for that for years because of the should haves and the could haves. And that leaves you feeling depressed and sad. And you're just like, I can't sit in this because nobody else is. It's like, you'd be surprised on what people are hiding behind closed doors.
Oh, 100%. And that's, kind of going back to what we talked about a little bit in the beginning with that grace of giving people when we're dealing with things, and just being understanding to those struggles, right? It might be like you said, it could be something really big, or it could just be something inside you that makes that struggle really big. Doesn't mean something externally, something really big had to happen, but maybe internally it's just
100%.
it's getting you into the same spot where somebody who did have an external event happen, and it can kind of go into
Yeah.
those same things. So, I wanted to ask you as well, like, what are some of those positive things that you do? Because I see you share your message, and I think it's so powerful and so wonderful. So what are some of those positive things that you do now in your life to share that message and to continue to grow, emotionally and spiritually, and just working on yourself as you go through life?
So a lot of that has shifted from when I was in college, but school was a big one. School was definitely the one that I was like, if I have anything like with raising my siblings, a lot of people were like, you should drop out of school. That's too much for you. You need to get, like make sure you have a job. And like, I have a job. But here's the thing, like, I don't have the open doors that I need that the degree would give, the higher paying jobs, the jobs where I don't have to kill myself over getting to work too. So education was literally my life until 3 years ago when I finished in 2021. But faith has played a huge part of that. Singing has been a huge part of that. Writing out my story the way I want to write out my story. A lot of people encourage like trauma dumping and being like, if you want a book, you have to share all the details because you want people to be captivated by your details. And I'm like, look, all I gotta say is I was in foster care. People are like, whoa. And I'm like, that's it. Like, I don't need to be like, here's all the ways that I was abused. I actually find that doesn't help. And so telling my story my way is just being like, hey, look, I was in foster care. I experienced different abuses. But what I had to deal with more is the mental games that played on me. And then I go into telling my story my way because there's freedom in not having to have everyone know your details. But there's also your audience actually gets trauma spiral, where it's my own term. I made it up. I'm a doctor. I can do that. But they're trauma spirals where you're listening to somebody's story and you're not really hearing everything they're saying because you're spiraling yourself into your own story. I can say in a group of foster care kids in a room with foster youth and people who work in foster care system or someone who's adopted or had a foster care kid with them, I could literally say, I was in foster care and your thought process immediately goes to why you were. And you go, we're the same person. And then they hear that the details are a little bit different. And they go, we went through something similar. But I so many times have had people come up to me and go, Danisha, when you were speaking, I wasn't hearing you because I started reliving my story. And I'm like, ooh, I don't want you to leave like that. I want you to leave with hope, not blocking out the whole hour that we just talked. So I always try to focus on, okay, what are some tangible things that we can do to take away from this? I always tell people like the things that I wish I knew about, like I do a lot of conversations around college, and it's like the things I wish I knew was the support programs. I wish I knew that assignments would give me a trigger. Certain assignments will make me spiral. I cannot do topics around most abuses. So I will ask the teacher, like, here's how I protect myself. And so I share with them, like, ask your professor to get a different topic or to get more time. And that has helped so many other students. But I try to grow in different ways. Like I love writing. I love pouring into people. I love coaching people. And now I own my own business. In 2020, I lost my job in the height of the pandemic, which was not fun. Um, and a year later, I started my own business and I became an entrepreneur. And I was like, wow, I'm trying to figure this out. But I have to grow daily to get rid of a lot of that anxiousness and panic and relying on other people to make it happen for me. But I think it was like a really good way for me to stretch myself and be like, I know what I'm doing. I don't have to live in imposter syndrome. But I love being able to pour into other people because that, like, they actually have a happier people. There's like research on it that happier people are people who give, not people who receive. So when we're able to serve somebody else in a capacity of maybe like a mentorship or just being a good friend, we actually are a lot happier than when we didn't do that. So I try to do stuff like that because it helps who's in the fire. If I'm like, hey, tell me your story. Don't hear mine. Mine doesn't matter at this point. What's going on with you? That actually helps people more than them hearing my story. They might not be like, oh, cool, nice story, and walk away. But when they need help, when they need to get out of the fire, when they're running toward addiction, and I sit down and say, hey, what's going on? And you get to share and open up for probably the first time in a long time to someone you trust, you're going to be able to be like, wow, I was hiding all of that. And now some of it doesn't seem as big as it was, or that's a lot bigger than I thought it was. I was downplaying this and I'm hurting. And that helps people grow more. So for me, I love being able to do speaking events where I train and I don't just come in and trauma dump, but I get to train people and be like, this is what we do with this. My favorite thing has been teaching like staff, faculty, parents, adults in the room how to help foster youth because that's such a thing that's untalked about where it's more of like just go do the job, just go do as best as you can and hope for the best. And it's not like, hey, from a foster care perspective, here's why that doesn't work, but also here's what you could do that is working, but do this again over here in this way and see what happens. And that has actually helped me. It brings a lot of joy to my life to be able to have hard conversations with people because there are people who don't want to go deep like that, but also too, like people who just don't relate. Because it's different when you go deeper with someone who gets it and go deeper in a conversation with someone who doesn't. You're just like, you walk away different. You're just like, okay, I just like if with someone who doesn't get it, you're like, oh my God, why did I share all of that? Versus when someone gets it, you're like, I am so glad I opened up. Man, I got so much out of that. And most of the time the person was just listening, but it's because they get you. And that's what I would hope that I can bring. And like, that's what keeps me going and like excites me to help people.
Yeah, and there's so many great things that you just said in there about helping people and what you do for yourself in that. And I just want to hit on what you said about giving somebody that space to be vulnerable, to share, to open up. I know those have been when somebody sat there and let me do that for them, or for me, somebody sat there and just let me open up and not try to like fix every problem or like say you're wrong in this or you're right in this, but just truly let me be vulnerable and open up. Those are some of the most helpful moments I've had in my life. And so I think that's, a big thing that you just said is, if you're struggling, find somebody that will just hear you out and look for that person that will just let you do that.
Absolutely. And I think too, if you're wanting to be that person who people come to, I always caution us on that because I have to ask myself this question all the time is like, why am I asking them to open up? What am I going to do with the information? Because there's a difference between actually helping someone and just listening to information. If we're just listening to information, we're just gathering. And we're just like, oh, okay, thanks for being vulnerable. Thank you so much. And then you leave. And that person's not actually helped. But if you're asking questions with a purpose, what you're doing is like, okay, I'm asking this information because I actually want to help. And if I'm not capable, if I don't have the tools to help, I'm going to help you find the person who does. So when we go into that conversation, it's kind of like asking someone, like you're walking by and you're like, how are you? And the other person's like, fine. Like, why ask the question? Why ask the question? So when we do that, it's that intentional step where we're like, hey, how are you? It's like, I'm okay. And it's like, hey, want to talk about it? Like, what's going on? Like, no rush conversation, but really, like, I'm asking to help follow up with you. I'm not just saying, like, hey, people do this a lot in the Christian community or in a religious community. It's like, what can I pray for? And they're like, all this stuff. And people are like, cool, see you later. And you're like, I never heard from you again. And it's just like, how about that? Like, it's different when someone texts you and said, hey, I've been praying for you. Hey, I was thinking about you. Like, hey, you told me this a week ago. It was a really heavy stuff. But like, what happened? Because I've been on both receiving ends, and the receiving end of somebody who's just kind of passing me by in conversation just to hear information. I literally feel like I just opened up in a very vulnerable way. And I'm like, man, like maybe I'm kind of jaded a little bit where I'm like, wow, like I opened up and this person's like not talking to me anymore. And it looks like they're avoiding me. So I must have said something that they're just like, you're not a good person. And now they hate me. That's what I usually think. But then if someone is like, hey, I was thinking about you, I was thinking about what we talked about, you shared so much, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I just wanted to see how you're doing. I'm like, oh, they actually heard me. They listened to what I had to say. And I always get struck by people who remember details. And I wish I try to be better at remembering details because I'm like, it's so important when someone's like, hey, how did that thing go? And you're like, what thing? And they're like, the thing, like that thing, the thing, the thing, the thing. And you're like, but the person who's like the event that you did like 2 weeks ago, how did that go? I've been praying for you, or I've been thinking about you, or I didn't see you post anything. Like I wanted to know, like, how did that event go from 2 weeks ago when you went out to that foster care thing? And I'm like, oh, you're a busy person and you remembered my event. Like, hold on. And I want to say, do that same thing for that person, but I don't want to ever be that person who just passes by. And I used to do that a lot because a lot of people would do that with me. And then someone had said something where they're like, I feel like no one sees me because they just pass me by. And I was like, oh my God, like I've done it too. So I always caution people, like when you are doing conversations, ask, why are you asking this information? Do you actually want to help, or are you just gathering information?
Yeah, and I love that again, just because it shows the power, I think, in wanting to do that and understanding that if you know your
Yeah.
reason to want to do that, it also creates what it realistically should be. Because like you just said, I've had so many people like in some of my darkest moments be like, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And like they know, they either see it or they know or they've heard what's going on, and it's like,
It's
"Well,
like,
I'm
why are
good."
you
And it's like,
asking?
yeah, and then when I say I'm good or I'm fine or I'm whatever, they're like, "Oh, okay, awesome." It's like,
They
okay.
walk on by and you're just like, because
Right.
the reason that you answered I'm fine or it's good is because you knew that they didn't actually care about the answer. But that makes you feel more alone because you're just like, man, if I trusted you, I would have like really told you how it was. And then you wouldn't have felt as alone for so long. And that like this is not like, okay, I want people to understand this. This is not something that I discovered. This is not something that I'm like, hey guys, like this is what every psychologist says. It has been studied for hundreds of years. Like if we want to get on a religious perspective, there is nothing new under the sun, as the Bible says. Like there is nothing new. But what it is I think we have all, there's moments in our life where it just kind of clicks of everything we've learned that we're like, oh, that's why. That's why I felt disconnected. It wasn't just people like, I just never found people I felt comfortable with saying, you know what, I'm not okay. And I mean, I'm good at putting a face on. People from high school have recently told me, like, girl, I had no idea you went through what you went through. And like, you came to school with a smile on your face. I had no idea. And I'm like, I wasn't hiding. I just was really happy to be at school. I was like, I don't have to live in my crap right now. I'm at school. Like, don't think about it. But they never had even like an idea of what I was, when I went home, what hell was waiting for me. And so if we can stop and be like, you know what? I don't want to just trust the smile standing in front of me. I want to be a friend and make sure that my people are good. So I want to make sure my friends are going to be good. I want to make sure that they don't feel alone. I don't want to wake up and I have had friends take their lives, and I don't want to wake up tomorrow and get that call of like, hey, so and so took their life. It's like, no, I don't want that. So let me be intentional with my, hey, how are you? How are you really doing? Especially when you know someone's going through stuff. Like, that question's kind of stupid when you know someone's going through something and you're like, how are you? It's like, do you really want to know? And I've kind of shifted, and when I know someone's going through something, instead of saying how are you, I say how are you holding up? What do you need this week? Because that question, I think, is not as like dismissive and rude as being like, how are you holding up? What do you need? What can I do for you? And they might not know what you can do for them, but just asking that difference, like that question has shifted conversations for me, because when I've said how are you doing, they're like, I'm good. But when I'm like, okay, how are you holding up? There's that, they usually, that my friends will take a breath and they're like, and they'll, most of the time there's no words. It's just, and I'm like, okay, what do you need? And that has shifted these conversations from I'm passing you by to like, I'm going to sit here with you unless you want me to not sit here with you.
Just such a powerful reframing of that question. And I really like, hearing that. And that's just, I think, a really good thing to do. If you really want to know how somebody's doing, that's a great reframing of that word to open up a conversation.
Yeah.
To edit that little piece right there. But yeah, I mean,
We could always keep it in.
this has been a great hour, and I think there's been so much powerful messaging that you've shared with us, and so much hope from your story about where you've come from, and what you're achieving and what you're pushing for, and showing that with that will and that way working together, there are so many possibilities in life. So I just, I want to just ask you, as we get close to wrapping up here, is there anything you want to share to end with and kind of put out there right at the end of our time together?
Yes, I would love for you guys all to follow. I'm working on my documentary. It's called 33 Roofs. It signifies all of the addresses that I've lived in since I was like 18. But it's going to be highlighting the homelessness and educational barriers that foster youth go through, as well as sharing my story in here. But hopefully creating a little bit of awareness of what we all could do to help the foster youth who are still in the fires today. So if you guys can follow, share, watch when it comes out. We're finishing filming in April, but we're super excited about it. But we need like people to like surround it and just watch it.
And I will put all the links in the description, so just go right into it and it'll be easy to find. But again, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it so much. And it's been a great conversation. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
And this has been Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.